The last words that echo the longest are often the ones no one fully understood. Long before the world remembered a famous distress signal, there was only the rhythmic sound of a wireless key tapping across the darkness of the North Atlantic. No one aboard the ship could see where every message would travel. No one knew which operators were listening, which radio rooms had already fallen silent, or which fragments of conversation would survive more than a century. In that small wireless room, surrounded by humming equipment and glowing electrical instruments, two young radio operators continued working as they had countless times before. Their responsibility was simple in principle but extraordinary in practice. Every message had to be received clearly, transmitted accurately, and delivered without delay across an invisible network that stretched beyond the horizon. Wireless communication was one of the greatest technological achievements of the early 20th century. It allowed ships separated by dozens or even hundreds of miles to exchange information almost instantly, creating a new sense of security on the open ocean. Yet despite its remarkable capabilities, the system still depended entirely on human judgment. Every message had to be recognized, interpreted, prioritized, and answered by another person sitting alone in another wireless room somewhere across the Atlantic. Technology connected the ships, but people determined whether that connection became meaningful. As the evening progressed, routine commercial traffic filled the airwaves. Passenger messages, navigation information, and operational communications moved steadily between ships and coastal stations. Nothing about the network suggested that history was only hours away from testing every assumption made about long-distance communication at sea. Inside the wireless room, concentration remained absolute. Sparks flashed across the transmitter while headphones carried distant signals through layers of static that naturally accompanied radio transmission during that era. Every sound demanded attention because every interruption could change the meaning of an entire conversation. At that moment, no one was thinking about history. They were simply doing their jobs with the professionalism expected of experienced wireless operators. Looking back today, it is tempting to imagine those final hours as if every participant already understood their historical significance. The reality was very different. They lived inside ordinary time, not historical time. Every decision was made without knowing which message would become the last, which transmission would later be quoted in official investigations, or which unanswered call would remain one of the most discussed moments in maritime history. This investigation begins not with a ship in crisis, but with a conversation already unfolding across the Atlantic. It is a story about voices carried through invisible waves, about information traveling farther than human sight, and about the fragile chain of communication that depended on countless individual decisions made in isolation. Before we can understand the final distress calls themselves, we first have to understand the remarkable network that carried them, because the greatest mystery may not be what was transmitted into the night, but what was actually heard, understood, and acted upon by those listening from far beyond the horizon. Inside the wireless room, time moved differently from the rest of the ship. While passengers filled elegant dining rooms, walked polished decks, or retired to their cabins, two radio operators remained surrounded by coils of wire, electrical equipment, and the steady rhythm of Morse code flowing invisibly through the night. Jack Phillips, the senior wireless operator, had earned a reputation for speed and precision. Beside him worked Harold Bride, younger but equally committed to mastering one of the newest professions in the modern world. Together they represented something remarkable for their era. They were not sailors navigating by stars, nor engineers tending massive steam engines below deck. Their workplace existed in an entirely different dimension, one built from invisible radio waves connecting ships scattered across hundreds of miles of open ocean. In 1912, wireless communication still carried an almost magical quality. For the first time in maritime history, captains were no longer completely isolated once they disappeared beyond the coastline. Weather reports, navigational warnings, commercial traffic, and personal telegrams could travel across the Atlantic within moments. Every transmission expanded the reach of human communication farther than ever before. Yet the technology remained imperfect. Signals competed for limited space across the airwaves, atmospheric conditions influenced reception, and every message depended upon another operator actively listening at exactly the right moment. There was no automatic recording system preserving every conversation. If a transmission was missed, interrupted, or misunderstood, it could simply disappear into the static forever. Throughout the voyage, the wireless room rarely rested. Passengers sent personal messages to friends and family waiting in America. Nearby vessels exchanged routine navigational information. Coastal stations handled commercial traffic almost continuously. Phillips and Bride balanced these responsibilities with remarkable efficiency, often working long hours while carefully managing an overwhelming flow of incoming and outgoing communications. Their concentration never drifted far from the sound inside their headphones, where faint electrical pulses carried voices that no one could actually hear. Every sequence of dots and dashes represented another person somewhere beyond the horizon. Some messages contained ordinary business. Others reported weather or sea conditions. Each required careful attention because even a single misplaced signal could alter an entire meaning. Looking back today, it is tempting to focus only on the transmissions that later became famous. Doing so overlooks something essential. Before history transformed those final hours into one of the most studied communication events ever recorded at sea, everything unfolding inside the wireless room still felt routine. Phillips continued clearing a backlog of passenger telegrams. Bride assisted where needed while monitoring incoming traffic. Equipment hummed steadily as electrical sparks bridged the transmitter with mechanical precision. The room itself was small, practical, and surprisingly ordinary considering the role it would soon play in history. Outside, the Atlantic stretched endlessly beneath a clear night sky. Somewhere beyond that darkness, dozens of other wireless operators sat alone in similar rooms aboard other ships, each listening to the same invisible network while managing their own responsibilities. None of them realized that within a short time, routine communication would suddenly give way to something entirely different. When the first urgent transmissions began moving across the airwaves, the true test would not be whether the technology worked. It would be whether the people connected by that technology understood the significance of what they were hearing before precious minutes quietly slipped away. As the evening advanced, the steady rhythm of ordinary radio traffic slowly began to change. Messages that only minutes earlier had focused on passenger telegrams, navigation updates, and routine commercial business now shared the airwaves with something far more urgent. Inside the wireless room, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride remained focused on the endless flow of Morse code arriving through their headphones. Every signal demanded complete concentration because wireless communication in 1912 offered no automatic safeguards. A message existed only as long as another operator successfully received, understood, and recorded it. If static interrupted the transmission or another signal overlapped it, valuable information could be lost forever. At first, the requests leaving the ship reflected the language and procedures familiar to experienced wireless operators. The internationally recognized distress call CQD was transmitted to nearby vessels, identifying a serious emergency and requesting immediate assistance. Around the same time, another signal also began appearing in the transmissions. SOS had only recently been adopted as the newer international distress signal, and many operators still viewed it as relatively unfamiliar compared with CQD. Harold Bride would later recall encouraging Jack Phillips to use the newer signal as well, joking that it might be his last opportunity to send it. That brief moment of professional humor has often been remembered because it revealed something deeply human. Even under extraordinary pressure, experienced operators continued thinking like professionals, concentrating on procedures rather than imagining how history would remember them. Soon the invisible radio network stretching across the North Atlantic became increasingly active. Wireless operators aboard nearby ships copied the distress calls as quickly as conditions allowed. Some immediately answered, requesting additional information. Others relayed messages farther across the network so vessels beyond the original transmission range could also receive the news. Every response depended upon distance, atmospheric conditions, transmitter power, antenna performance, and perhaps most importantly, whether another operator happened to be listening at that exact moment. The technology itself was remarkable, but it remained entirely dependent upon people. Every successful communication required two individuals separated by miles of darkness to perform their responsibilities almost perfectly. Some ships acknowledged the calls almost immediately. Others responded more slowly as operators attempted to determine the seriousness of the situation. A few never answered because their wireless rooms had already closed for the night according to normal operating practice. Looking backward through history, it is tempting to view every unanswered transmission as a failure. The historical evidence suggests something more complicated. Wireless communication during this period operated as a living network rather than a guaranteed system. No central control coordinated every ship. No automatic alarms awakened sleeping operators. Every captain relied upon the judgment, availability, and awareness of individuals scattered across an immense ocean. This reality transformed every minute into something increasingly significant. Each successful transmission strengthened the possibility that help was moving closer. Each missed signal created another gap in a conversation that historians would spend generations trying to reconstruct. What survived inside official records allows us to follow much of that extraordinary exchange, but the deeper question remains unchanged. Among every vessel receiving fragments of those urgent messages, who truly understood the full meaning of what they were hearing before time quietly began slipping beyond recovery? Within minutes, what had begun as a conversation between one ship and a handful of nearby operators expanded into something much larger. Invisible radio waves spread across the North Atlantic in every direction, carrying fragments of urgent information from one wireless room to another. No one could see the network itself, yet it connected dozens of ships scattered across hundreds of miles of open water. Every operator became both a receiver and a messenger, copying signals, answering requests, and passing critical information onward as quickly as conditions allowed. The remarkable speed of wireless communication gave the impression that the entire ocean had suddenly become one connected community. In reality, the network remained surprisingly fragile. Every transmission still depended upon distance, signal strength, atmospheric interference, equipment performance, and above all, human attention. Some operators copied messages perfectly. Others struggled with fading signals buried beneath electrical static. Every exchange required patience, skill, and experience. As additional distress messages reached nearby vessels, captains requested updated positions, estimated distances, and navigational details that would help determine the fastest possible course through the darkness. Wireless operators relayed those requests back across the airwaves while continuing to monitor new transmissions arriving from different directions. Each message answered one question while creating several more. Reports did not always arrive in perfect chronological order. Different ships received different portions of the conversation depending upon their location, radio equipment, and the constantly changing conditions affecting long-distance transmission. This created a communication network unlike anything most people imagine today. There was no single control center collecting every message into one complete picture. Instead, each vessel possessed only fragments of the larger conversation. Captains made important decisions using whatever information happened to reach their own wireless room, often without knowing what neighboring ships had already heard or transmitted. Looking back through official inquiries and surviving wireless logs, historians can reconstruct much of this remarkable exchange, but even those records contain unavoidable gaps. Some original messages were never preserved. Others survive only because operators later recalled them from memory during testimony. A few transmissions appear differently in separate historical sources, reminding us that the network itself was dynamic rather than perfectly documented. This uncertainty is not evidence of failure. It reflects the practical realities of one of the world's earliest large-scale wireless communication systems operating exactly as it had been designed. Meanwhile, operators aboard responding ships continued working with extraordinary determination. Some remained at their instruments almost continuously, requesting updated coordinates, forwarding information to additional vessels, and confirming details whenever possible. Their role extended far beyond simply listening. They became the living connections holding together a rapidly expanding web of communication spread across the Atlantic night. Every successful transmission increased the possibility that another ship would understand the seriousness of the situation. Every delay, interruption, or misunderstood message introduced another layer of uncertainty into an already complex emergency. The farther the conversation traveled across the ocean, the more dependent it became upon interpretation rather than mere reception. That distinction would soon prove just as important as the signals themselves, because the next stage of this investigation is not about which messages were transmitted. It is about which ships truly understood what those messages meant, and how those different interpretations shaped one of the most consequential responses in maritime history. By this stage of the night, the invisible network stretched across the Atlantic had become a mosaic of different perspectives rather than a single, unified conversation. Every ship occupied its own position, heard its own sequence of transmissions, and interpreted events through the information available inside its own wireless room. This is where the historical investigation becomes especially compelling, because not every vessel experienced the same emergency in the same way. The passenger liner Carpathia was among the first to understand that the situation demanded immediate action. Wireless operator Harold Cottam had been preparing to end his duties when he happened to contact another ship regarding routine traffic. That ordinary exchange unexpectedly brought the urgent transmissions to his headphones. Within moments, he informed Captain Arthur Rostron, whose response has since become one of the most carefully documented examples of decisive leadership at sea. Carpathia immediately altered course and steamed toward the reported position with every practical measure taken to maximize speed while maintaining control. Other vessels also entered the growing conversation. Olympic, the sister ship traveling in another part of the Atlantic, received important transmissions and remained in contact as additional information developed. Frankfurt answered several messages but struggled at times to understand the rapidly changing situation, leading to exchanges that later appeared confusing when viewed through surviving wireless records alone. Mount Temple acknowledged the distress calls and headed toward the reported position, while Virginian also received transmissions despite being much farther away. Each vessel contributed another piece to the larger communication network, yet none possessed the complete picture that historians can assemble today by combining records from multiple sources. Then there was Californian, whose role would become one of the most debated subjects in maritime history. Its wireless operator had already ended his shift after exchanging messages earlier in the evening. Without someone continuously monitoring the receiver, no further wireless communication arrived aboard during the critical hours that followed. Meanwhile, officers on deck observed lights and later reported rockets rising above the distant horizon. Whether those visual observations alone should have been interpreted as unmistakable evidence of a major maritime emergency remains one of the central questions examined by investigators for more than a century. Looking carefully at the surviving evidence reveals an important pattern. The difference between the responding ships was not simply distance. It was information. Every captain acted according to what was communicated to him through the combination of wireless reports, visual observations, navigational conditions, and professional judgment available at that specific moment. Modern readers naturally compare every decision against the complete historical timeline now preserved inside archives. The people living through those events never possessed that advantage. They acted within incomplete knowledge, uncertain reports, and rapidly changing circumstances spread across hundreds of miles of darkness. This distinction explains why the historical record remains both fascinating and complex. Some ships received enough information to recognize an immediate emergency. Others received only fragments. Some heard urgent transmissions directly through wireless communication, while others relied upon visual observations or second-hand reports arriving later. Understanding exactly who heard what, when they heard it, and how they interpreted those messages requires more than simply reading a list of surviving transmissions. It requires examining the evidence preserved by official inquiries, wireless logs, eyewitness testimony, and technical records that attempted to reconstruct one extraordinary conversation carried across an entire ocean, a conversation whose final details continue to challenge historians even today. Once the immediate emergency had passed, another challenge quietly began. Investigators now faced the impossible task of reconstructing a conversation that had never been preserved in its entirety. Unlike modern communication systems that automatically record transmissions, the wireless network of 1912 left behind only fragments. Some messages survived inside official logbooks. Others appeared in handwritten notes copied by operators during the night. Several became part of sworn testimony months later. A few existed only because multiple witnesses independently remembered hearing similar transmissions. Together, these surviving pieces formed one of the most remarkable collections of historical evidence ever assembled for maritime communication, yet they also revealed how much had already disappeared forever. The first major investigation began in the United States only days after the disaster. Senators questioned surviving crew members, wireless operators from responding ships, maritime officials, and technical experts in an effort to understand exactly how information had moved across the Atlantic. Every witness described events from a different position inside the same communication network. Some remembered precise wording. Others recalled only general meaning. Small differences between testimonies quickly became important because investigators were attempting to establish an accurate timeline measured not merely in hours, but often in minutes. Later, the British inquiry expanded upon many of the same questions while introducing additional evidence gathered from official shipping records, navigation documents, and technical specialists familiar with Marconi wireless equipment. Neither investigation approached the surviving material as a perfect record. Instead, both recognized that human memory, rapidly changing circumstances, and incomplete documentation required careful comparison before reliable conclusions could be reached. This approach remains one of the greatest strengths of the historical record. Rather than relying upon a single witness or one surviving document, investigators compared independent sources whenever possible, searching for patterns that appeared consistently across multiple testimonies and technical records. Even so, several important uncertainties remained. Some reported transmissions appear with slightly different wording depending upon the source. Certain timestamps vary by a few minutes because individual ships maintained their own clocks. In several cases, investigators had to determine whether two witnesses were describing the same message or two separate transmissions that sounded remarkably similar. These are not signs of careless investigation. They are natural consequences of reconstructing an event that unfolded simultaneously across hundreds of miles of open ocean through technology that depended entirely upon human operators. Historians today continue following the same careful methodology. Primary sources receive greater weight than later recollections whenever possible. Wireless logs are compared against official testimony. Technical limitations of early radio equipment are evaluated alongside atmospheric conditions reported during the night. This disciplined process does not eliminate every uncertainty, but it greatly reduces the temptation to replace missing evidence with speculation. That distinction is essential. Responsible historical investigation acknowledges both what can be established with confidence and what must remain uncertain because the evidence simply does not extend that far. As more documents surfaced and additional analysis continued over the following decades, one realization became increasingly clear. The greatest mystery was no longer whether distress calls had been transmitted. The surviving evidence demonstrates that they were. The more difficult question became whether the operators who sent those messages, working under extraordinary pressure inside a small wireless room, fully understood the historical consequences of every signal leaving their transmitter during those unforgettable final hours. The surviving records allow us to understand what was transmitted across the Atlantic with remarkable clarity, but they also reveal something equally important about the people behind those transmissions. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride have often been remembered simply as the two wireless operators aboard the ship. That description is accurate, yet it barely captures the responsibility resting on their shoulders during those extraordinary hours. Inside a room no larger than a modest office, surrounded by electrical equipment that represented the cutting edge of maritime technology, they became the only direct link between their ship and an entire ocean filled with potential assistance. Every decision they made influenced not only what information left the vessel, but also how that information would be understood hundreds of miles away. Throughout the emergency, Phillips remained focused on maintaining continuous communication despite the overwhelming flow of incoming and outgoing traffic. Requests for updated positions arrived alongside acknowledgments from responding ships. Operators asked for clarification, repeated important details, and attempted to estimate arrival times as they prepared to alter course. Every reply required speed without sacrificing accuracy. Morse code rewarded precision, not haste alone. A single incorrect character could change a message, while an incomplete transmission could force another operator to request repetition, consuming valuable time across an already crowded network. Harold Bride worked beside Phillips, assisting whenever possible while helping organize the growing stream of communications entering the wireless room. Later testimony describes an atmosphere defined less by panic than by relentless concentration. The operators understood that every minute mattered, yet their work demanded disciplined attention rather than emotional reaction. They could not allow urgency to replace accuracy because every ship depending upon their transmissions required reliable information to make navigational decisions. Looking back through surviving testimony, what stands out most is not dramatic language but remarkable professionalism. The operators continued performing the same technical procedures they had practiced throughout their careers, even though the circumstances surrounding those procedures had changed completely. Their commitment reflects an often overlooked truth about emergencies. The people most responsible for managing critical situations frequently rely upon routine, training, and discipline precisely because uncertainty makes emotional decision-making less reliable. Historians examining the surviving wireless logs have noted how communication remained structured even as conditions became increasingly difficult. Position reports continued to be transmitted. Replies were acknowledged. Information moved through the network according to established procedures whenever circumstances allowed. This consistency provides modern researchers with one of the strongest foundations for reconstructing the sequence of events. It also reminds us that the historical record owes much of its reliability to individuals who continued documenting information with extraordinary care while working under immense pressure. Yet perhaps the most profound realization emerges only after comparing their testimony with the broader investigation. Neither Phillips nor Bride could know which transmission would later become famous, which exchange would be quoted before official inquiries, or which missing fragment would inspire generations of historical debate. They experienced those hours one message at a time, never seeing the complete communication network that historians would later reconstruct from dozens of independent sources. In many ways, that limitation defines the entire story. The operators could control only the messages they sent. They could never know how completely those messages were received, interpreted, or acted upon beyond the horizon. It is that invisible distance between transmission and understanding that leads directly to the final chapter of this investigation, where the legacy of those remarkable communications ultimately reshaped maritime safety for the entire world. When historians look back at those final wireless transmissions, they often focus on the messages themselves. Equally important, however, is what happened because those messages were heard. The emergency exposed weaknesses in maritime communication that had existed for years but had never been tested under such extraordinary circumstances. Ships did not maintain continuous wireless watches. Operating schedules varied from one vessel to another. Equipment differed in power and performance. Procedures depended heavily upon individual operators rather than internationally enforced standards. None of these conditions appeared unusual before that April night because the technology itself was still relatively new. Afterward, they became impossible to ignore. Governments, maritime organizations, and wireless companies began examining every stage of the communication process, asking not only what had happened, but how similar situations could be prevented in the future. Official investigations gathered testimony from captains, wireless operators, engineers, and technical specialists whose combined experience shaped a new understanding of maritime safety. One conclusion appeared repeatedly throughout those discussions. Wireless communication could no longer be treated primarily as a commercial convenience for passenger messages and routine business traffic. It had become an essential safety system upon which lives might depend. That realization marked a turning point in the history of navigation. Among the most significant changes was the growing expectation that ships should maintain continuous radio monitoring rather than allowing wireless rooms to close overnight according to ordinary schedules. The value of immediate communication had been demonstrated beyond question. If urgent transmissions could arrive at any hour, someone needed to be listening at every hour. This principle eventually became one of the foundations of modern maritime practice. International cooperation also accelerated. The lessons drawn from the investigations contributed to broader agreements concerning radio procedures, emergency communication, and safety regulations at sea. Maritime nations recognized that oceans connected every vessel regardless of nationality, making consistent standards more important than individual company policies. These discussions helped shape reforms that influenced future versions of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, commonly known as SALAS. While numerous technological advances followed during the decades ahead, the underlying principle remained remarkably simple. Communication should never depend upon chance alone. Looking back, it becomes clear that the legacy of those final transmissions extends far beyond the historical event that inspired them. Their greatest impact may not lie in the individual messages preserved inside archives, but in the global changes those messages inspired afterward. Every continuous radio watch, every standardized emergency procedure, and every improvement in maritime communication reflects lessons learned from a single night when information traveled across an invisible network under extraordinary pressure. This transformation reminds us that history is sometimes shaped not only by the events themselves, but by the decisions societies make after carefully studying those events. The voices carried through the Atlantic darkness eventually became more than evidence examined by investigators. They became catalysts for lasting reform. Yet one final question still remains. Even after decades of research, preserved wireless logs, official testimony, and international reforms, do we truly understand every part of that remarkable conversation, or are there still moments within those final transmissions that remain permanently beyond the reach of history, preserved only in fragments carried away by time and the open sea? More than a century has passed since those signals crossed the North Atlantic, yet they continue to invite the same question that confronted investigators in 1912. Did history preserve the complete conversation, or only the parts that happened to survive? The surviving wireless logs, official testimony, technical records, and government inquiries allow us to reconstruct an extraordinary sequence of events with remarkable confidence. We know that distress calls were transmitted. We know that multiple ships received them. We know that experienced wireless operators responded with professionalism under immense pressure. We also know that those communications changed the future of maritime safety, leading to continuous radio watches, stronger international standards, and a new understanding of how critical reliable communication could be at sea. These conclusions rest upon substantial historical evidence. Yet responsible historical investigation also requires acknowledging where certainty ends. Not every transmission was preserved. Not every conversation was recorded word for word. Some messages survive only because independent witnesses remembered hearing them. Others appear in different forms across separate sources, requiring historians to compare evidence carefully before reaching measured conclusions. Those remaining uncertainties do not weaken the historical record. Instead, they remind us that history is built from surviving evidence rather than perfect knowledge. Perhaps that is why this story continues to resonate long after the technology itself has become obsolete. At its heart, it is not simply about Morse code, radio equipment, or one famous maritime disaster. It is about communication between people separated by distance, uncertainty, and time. Every operator who placed headphones over his ears that night listened to the same invisible ocean, yet no individual could hear every voice or understand every part of the larger conversation. Each possessed only a fragment of the whole. Ironically, historians face much the same challenge today. We gather surviving documents, compare testimony, evaluate technical evidence, and gradually assemble a broader picture, fully aware that some pieces may never be recovered. That careful balance between evidence and humility lies at the center of every meaningful historical investigation. It allows us to distinguish between what can be demonstrated, what can reasonably be inferred, and what must honestly remain unknown. In many ways, the final legacy of those wireless operators extends beyond the messages they transmitted. Their work reminds us that communication is never merely about sending information. It is equally about reception, interpretation, timing, and human judgment. Technology can carry a signal across an ocean, but only people can decide what that signal means and how they will respond. That lesson remains just as relevant today as it was on that quiet April night more than 100 years ago. The Atlantic has long since returned to silence, and the electrical sparks that once leaped across those wireless transmitters disappeared generations ago. Yet the questions carried within those final conversations continue to travel through history. Some have been answered through careful research and surviving evidence. Others remain open, not because historians have failed, but because history itself sometimes leaves us with unfinished conversations. Perhaps that is the most enduring mystery of all. The greatest stories are not always the ones that end with certainty. Sometimes they are the ones that remind us how much can be learned from listening carefully to the voices that still echo across time, and how much wisdom can be found in recognizing the quiet spaces where history no longer speaks.